So just a quick show of hands, how many people use a course book that is imposed on you by your institution? Yeah, so would you say over half? Yeah, maybe about half, yeah. So you've done this great needs analysis that Laura explained, but then you've got this course book, so how do you marry the two? And actually, it's not so difficult. You've got this filter that Laura talked about, this lingua franca core. And so if you sit down with this list and sit down with your course book and look at what's in there, you can then sort of think about what you've already got at your disposal to work on those areas that are key for ELF intelligibility. But you need to have a bit of a critical eye when you're looking at this. Some of the pronunciation exercises, or that are labeled pronunciation exercises, it may be that you think, okay, under the lingua franca core, this is not essential for intelligibility. In fact, it may be damaging. Some things like, for example, the word can. I don't know about you, but in my course book, there's bits where it says can is more appropriate than can. And so these weak forms is something that course books often focuses on. If you're looking at ELF intelligibility, that would be considered actually detrimental, make you less intelligible if you say can instead of can. But you don't need to get rid of it totally, because perhaps that'd be useful to improve students' listening, working on their bottom-up listening skills, and receptively, they need to be able to decode that. But do we need to be drilling that? Do we need to drill into our students can instead of can? And it's about giving students choice. And that's what ELF is all about. It's actually thinking about your needs and giving learners the ability to make informed choices. And so those are kind of crucial ELF moments that often come up in the class, where students might ask which is more correct. And then you can talk about the notion of correctness with them and say, okay, but which did you find easier? When you were listening to those dictation activities that often come first in a pronunciation exercise, did you find that easier to understand when they said can instead of can? And if not, then perhaps think about your context. So my students in Dubai are speaking to all different nationalities. So saying to the students, do you think that it would be easier for someone to understand you this way or that way? And then it's up to them to choose what they think is better. So having a critical eye and thinking about receptive or productive, is what do we want to focus on? Some activities have multiple aims, and sometimes the aims, you may want to focus one part receptively, but the other part productively. It's possible to still use the exercise as it is. You don't need to then retype it and eliminate the part that is only for receptive purposes. For example, stress, talking about weak forms, stress and unstress. You don't need to be drilling the schwa in order to work on the stress. Under the lingua franca core, stress, nuclear stress, is key for intelligibility. But these are often combined in coursebook exercises with weak forms. But you can still focus on the stress part and just leave the weak forms to one side. It doesn't mean you need to get rid of the exercise altogether. It's just thinking about why you're doing it, what your aim is. The last thing to think about when you're looking at your coursebook is the phonemic chart. Often this is used within the coursebook, and it's something that which you're probably familiar with in your classes, and it represents a particular accent of British English that Richard's touched on earlier, RP, received pronunciation. And so this could be problematic if students and teachers perceive this as a model. And as Richard said, this is not a model, but it is a useful tool. And the way that I've been using that in my classrooms is to help students to put all those different spelling patterns under one symbol. So just to show you a few examples, this is an example of a syllabus that I made for my elementary class. So on the left column, we've got including productively, so things I get students to actually do. On the right, we've got included receptively. And in the middle, maybe include, because we've got word stress, which is still a bit of a gray area, and there's still research going on in that area at the moment. So again, it's thinking about students' needs. If you've got a class where some students need to operate in an ELF context, but some students do need to assimilate within a native speaker environment, well, then you know that the things on the right include receptively. You could then direct your students to that productively if their need is to assimilate within a native speaker context. And I've had that before. just like with anything else you do in your classroom, if you've got a student with a particular need, take 5 minutes, quickly speak to them, set maybe a bit extra for homework, and then also you can even use that student to produce things that the others then listen to, so the others practice their receptive skills, and that student who needs to produce that can then practice their pronunciation productively. So it's quite possible to have students with varied needs within the same class. And we're always selective in other areas of our teaching. I think we'd probably all say that if we have a course book with all these different grammar items, some we might give more weight to than others depending on our learners' needs. And really what we're saying is, well, why should it be any different with pronunciation? Why wouldn't you consider your learners' needs and be selective based on that? So just to show you an example now, this is from New Cutting Edge, of what I mean about an exercise that focuses on something you could do receptively. Here you can see we've got contractions. So with exercise 1, it's a dictation exercise, really useful for practicing bottom-up listening. But in my context, my students might ask me, okay, teacher, do I say I will or do I say I'll? Which one is correct? And again, you can say, well, both are correct, but which did you find easier to understand? And in your context, which do you think your listeners would find easier to understand? And then it's up to them to make that informed decision. And I've had really positive and fruitful discussions with students, and they've actually said, yeah, it sounds like you're eating your words, and yeah, I don't want to do that, and that's their choice, and I respect that. So all these kind of ELF moments really do add up. They're just 30 seconds here and there, but it does end up painting a real picture that your students feel that their needs are being taken into account, and rather than just native speaker expectations. The other thing I mentioned was the phonemic chart. Here we've got S and Sh. In my context, my students wouldn't have a problem producing Sh, but they would have a problem spelling it. You can see we've got collection with TI, fashion, SH, obsession, double S. And this is problematic in my context, is the spelling. So I wouldn't ditch this, but use it in a different way. And it comes back to thinking about your aims. What are you trying to achieve? And using this, although it's labeled pronunciation, for me, I would use this and use it for spelling. And the way I would use it is to create a grid, and then you've got the different spellings, and then students can add words into that as they come across them. And then also it comes back to consistency, as this lady said. And it just gives the impression that it's not a model. It is just a tool. So after all this filtering, you've got your syllabus and you have eliminated some parts. You should have more time on your hands to focus on the parts that students really do need to work on. But again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can still use your course book to do extra work on the areas that your students need. I'm sure that with listening exercises, we're often using the transcript to look for vocabulary, for example. Why not mine the transcript also for features of pronunciation to work on? Laura touched on nuclear stress. That's something that Laura actually wrote an excellent blog post on our blog. The link is on your handout, which fully illustrates how to do a lesson working on nuclear stress. So I won't go into that in too much detail, but you could use your transcripts in your book in that same way that she has demonstrated in that lesson. The other thing to think about is using your students as models. Richard talked a bit about models, and I think if your students have produced something that appears to be intelligible to everyone in the class, when you're drilling it, why repeat it yourself as a teacher? Why not say, okay, Ahmed, that was great. Could you say that again? Okay, everyone listen. Got it? Okay, 1, 2, 3, everyone. Okay, Ahmed, can you say it again? Everyone got it? Again, 1, 2, 3, all together. And he's the model. Why do I need to repeat it? And I think that gives out a message to students that they are also intelligible models. The other thing is to give extra time ahead of speaking activities to prepare for pronunciation. So we often give time to prepare what vocabulary or what structures students want to use, but what about the way they want to say it? And just giving a little bit of extra time and thought to how they're going to say it could also give the right message.